Well, for a closer look at some of the main stories in today's newspapers, I'm joined by someone who is much younger than that last person I was talking about. It's Dorcas Gwata, our newspaper analyst. Dorcas, thanks for coming in. Let's start in Nigeria with the paper This Day, which and the story of the day, really, which we're going to cover a little bit later in the programme in more depth, is this fuel crisis. The headline there saying, "Fuel subsidy, Buhari's make or mar decision." This is Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, of course, but seems to be on the verge of kind of meltdown, really, due to this widespread and worsening scarcity of fuel. How has this come about?
Simon, Nigeria's economy is far too dependent on oil. And this is what happens when you have a single economy, a monopoly economy, where you're depending purely on one commodity. It is not diversified. It can diversify itself because Nigerians are very, very good at many other things. They've got a moving media system that is actually top of the agenda in Africa. So it is far too dependent on one commodity. It's sometimes not stable enough. It's gone through a lot of period of uncertainty. So Buhari has a challenge here. He has set aside a very impressive and plausible proposal to stabilize the economy, but it is far too dependent on oil, and that is the danger.
Yeah, well, at the moment, as we'll hear a little bit later, the current or the new incumbent Buhari's party is blaming the previous one for leaving the economy in such a mess, which is what they do, I guess, in times of a big crisis like this.
It is, and it's a handover system which is very problematic. But let's remind ourselves, Nigeria recently became the bigger economy in Africa after South Africa, which is somewhat telling us about what's going on in the continent. If Nigeria's economy is actually dipping down, then where does that leave that? What does that tell us about the broader economy in Africa? So you are seeing some snapshots, a growing middle class, but far too many people are left behind in the bottom billion, if you like, in Africa.
I guess we've also got to see that this is the first time the Nigerian democracy has ever changed. So there's going to be teething problems, isn't there? There's going to be a little bit of chaos at the start of that. Let's go to South Africa. The Times in South Africa, which has the headline, "South African prisons flout Mandela standard." This is prisons in South Africa apparently failing to meet standards known in the country as Mandela reforms, overcrowding, unnatural deaths, and the spread of disease, all running counter to those reforms. You'd think with everything that Mandela did for the country, the amount of time that he was in prison in the country, that this is something that South Africa would take very seriously indeed.
I think Mandela's turning in his grave for many reasons, whether it's the economy, whether social issues, HIV, crime. I think he's turning in his grave. But a closer look at the conditions here in South Africa, there's a huge overcrowding, and that speaks to a broader, very high crime rate in South Africa. Not necessarily getting convictions, but you've got a lot of crime rate. Speaks to a broader legal system that is not always in place. And we know that TB is very, very high in South Africa, and that's seconded by high HIV rates. So the conditions are very appalling. Conditions for women particularly are very appalling. It was sometimes women giving birth in these prisons. So yes, Zuma has challenges. Does he prioritize these challenges? It's not necessarily, one doesn't get the feeling that he's necessarily prioritizing the lower belt of his population. So yeah, ongoing challenges. We may get an insight into how the conditions are when Oscar Pistorius comes out, because he's coming out in a few months' time. So we may get but I will add on to that, Simon, there's a lot of rehabilitation that does go into these prisons. And some are coming out with some sort of form of rehabilitation, but the challenges continue.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's go to the Wall Street Journal. The headline there, "Burundi opposition figures go into hiding." These are politicians, journalists and activists after the leader of the opposition Union for Peace and Development Party was shot and killed. Is this, you think, the crackdown from President Nkurunziza, who obviously was ousted for about 5 minutes and then returned to power? Do you think he's going after those who've tried to kick him out of power?
Case I've been keeping a very close eye on in the last couple of days, if not weeks. Very volatile situation, very difficult situation, and frankly, very dangerous situation. Yes, opposition leaders will be concerned, but can you imagine being the general population in Burundi? Nkurunziza is a rebel leader by background. He will rule the country as a rebel leader. He will not back down. He's quite happy. He's showing us all the signs here that he's quite happy to go to any length to ensure that he holds on to power, and he will. Thousands will die. Thousands have already fled into the borders. We've got a cholera outbreak in a refugee camp in Tanzania. But Simon, I really think that East African leaders here have a position to pull themselves together, to pull this guy in and rein him in. Yes, Kenya has challenges. Rwanda has challenges, but these are the guys who should really pull him in. In the absence of a credible African Union, I think they absolutely should pull him in. We're facing a catastrophe here on a backdrop of an ethnic conflict.
And an election coming up. I mean, how is that going to happen?
Impossible and uncredible, unfeasible. It cannot happen. We need to secure citizens here, the basic citizens. In assassination, Simon, in the context of African conflicts, it's a huge risk factor for civil unrest and war. Once you have an assassination, you then have the precedence of ethnic divides. This guy had a Muslim background, and he will have most certainly as Africans go, will have a tribal context to that. But we are very well positioned now for full-blown war in Rwanda. And we sat down in Burundi. In Rwanda, we sat back and watched. We can't sit back and watch this one. It's too dangerous.
Absolutely. Dorcas, that's all we've got time for the moment. Thank you very much indeed.